There are some sounds in music that are simply immortal. They're woven into the fabric of our lives, the soundtrack to moments we'll never forget. Think of the shimmering, hopeful guitar chords that open the song Kid by the Pretenders. It's a sound of pure, melodic sunshine, a cascade of notes that feels both nostalgic and eternally fresh. Or the iconic stop-start swagger of Brass in Pocket, a riff that's as confident and cool as the singer's own voice. For 40 years, we've heard these songs on the radio, in films, in supermarkets. They are part of our shared cultural DNA. We know the voice, of course, the unmistakable, tough but tender alto of Chrissie Hynde, one of rock and roll's most enduring icons. But what about that guitar? That sound so unique and so influential that it would quietly shape the course of music for the decade to come. Who was the architect behind it? His name was James Honeyman-Scott, and his story is one of the most brilliant and heartbreaking tragedies in modern music. It's a story about a young man who dreamed of the perfect band, found it, and helped guide it to the top of the world, only to have it all vanish in a heartbeat. He was the melodic soul of the Pretenders, the secret weapon who made them more than just another punk band. And just as his vision was fully realized, just as the world was learning his name, he was gone. This is the story of a ghost in the machine, the tale of a genius you've been listening to your whole life without ever knowing who he was. To understand the miracle of the Pretenders, you have to understand the world they were born into. London in the late 1970s was a city shaking off a hangover. The psychedelic optimism of the 60s had curdled, and the bloated, indulgent, progressive rock of the early 70s was being violently rejected. In its place, punk rock had exploded like a Molotov cocktail thrown into a royal tea party. It was loud, fast, angry, and deliberately simple. It was a musical reset button, a declaration that anyone could pick up a guitar and make a statement. But by 1978, even punk was starting to feel like a uniform. Its initial chaotic energy was hardening into a rigid set of rules. The music scene was caught between two extremes: the nihilistic three-chord thrash of punk and the slick, polished pop that was beginning to dominate the charts. There was a space in the middle, a void waiting to be filled by something new, something that had punk's raw energy and attitude, but also possessed melody, sophistication, and a deep respect for the classic rock and roll that had come before. Into this landscape walked two people from entirely different worlds. One was Chrissie Hynde, an American from Akron, Ohio. She had moved to London years earlier, drawn by a romantic vision of the British music scene. She was a true believer, a rock and roll lifer who had written for the NME, worked at Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood's famous Sex Shop, and had tried and failed to get a band off the ground for years. She was smart, driven, and fiercely independent, with a voice that could cut through steel and a vulnerability that could break your heart. She had the songs, she had the vision, but she didn't have the band. The other was James Honeyman-Scott, a kid from Hereford, a sleepy cathedral city on the border of Wales, about as far from the London punk scene as you could get. Jimmy, as everyone called him, was a guitar prodigy, but while his contemporaries were either trying to play as fast as possible or sneering at the very idea of a guitar solo, Jimmy was a student of the classics. He loved the melodic craftsmanship of players like Hank Marvin of the Shadows, the shimmering textures of the Byrds, and the powerful riffs of bands like Cream and the Kinks. He wasn't a punk. He was a musician, a craftsman who believed in the power of a perfectly constructed guitar part. He was working in a music shop, playing in local bands, and dreaming of a band that could bridge the gap between pop and rock, a band with style, substance, and killer tunes. He was waiting for a singer who understood. The story of James Honeyman-Scott's life is tragically short, so its beginning feels all the more poignant. Born in 1956, he grew up in a quiet, working-class family. He was obsessed with the guitar from an early age, spending countless hours in his bedroom, not just learning solos, but deconstructing songs. He wasn't interested in showing off. He was interested in how music worked. How did a simple chord change make you feel something? How could a guitar part become a hook as memorable as the vocal line itself? He played in a series of local Hereford bands, most notably a group called Cheeks, which also featured a future member of the Verve and a powerhouse drummer named Martin Chambers. But Jimmy was creatively restless. He had a sound in his head that he couldn't quite find the right outlet for. He loved the energy of the new music coming out of London, but he felt it lacked musicality. He once said, "I was very bored with the punk thing. It was just noise, and I was into melody." His life changed when he got a call from a friend about an American singer who was putting a band together in London. Her name was Chrissie Hynde. Jimmy was initially skeptical. He drove to London to meet her, and the two sat down with acoustic guitars. Chrissie played him her songs. They were raw, unconventional, and full of attitude. They weren't simple punk anthems. They were intricate, emotional vignettes. Jimmy saw the potential immediately. He heard the spaces in her songs where his melodic ideas could live and breathe. But he had one condition. He told Chrissie that her band needed a proper rhythm section. He knew just the guys. He brought in his friend Pete Farndon, a charismatic, hard-living bassist who had the swagger of a rock star and the chops to back it up. And after a few false starts with other drummers, they convinced their old Hereford mate Martin Chambers to join. Chambers was a monster behind the kit, a drummer with the power of John Bonham and the finesse of a jazz player. In that moment, in a dingy London rehearsal room in 1978, the Pretenders were born. And it wasn't just Chrissie Hynde's backing band, it was a gang, a perfect, volatile, four-way chemical reaction. Chrissie was the sharp, poetic American heart. Pete and Martin were the thunderous English rock and roll engine, and Jimmy Honeyman-Scott was the melodic soul, the secret ingredient that made it all magical. With the lineup solidified, they quickly signed to Real Records and entered the studio to record their debut album. It was here that Jimmy's genius truly blossomed. He wasn't just the lead guitarist, he was the band's primary musical arranger. While Chrissie wrote the lyrics and the basic song structures, it was Jimmy who colored them in, who gave them their texture and shape. He had a unique approach to the guitar. He famously disliked long, indulgent solos, calling them boring. Instead, he crafted intricate, layered parts that served the song. He was a master of using effects, particularly the new chorus pedals that were just becoming popular. He used them not as a gimmick, but to create a signature sound, a shimmering liquid tone that could be both beautiful and melancholic. He would spend hours working out his parts, ensuring that every note had a purpose. He saw the two guitars in the band, his and Chrissie's, as an orchestra. He'd often say, "Chrissie plays the rhythm and I play the melody around it." Listen to the song, Kid. Chrissie's rhythm guitar provides the steady, driving pulse, but it's Jimmy's lead part that makes the song soar. It's a masterclass in melodic invention, a beautiful arpeggiated line that weaves in and out of the vocal, commenting on it, supporting it, elevating it. It's not a solo, it's a counter melody, a second voice in the song. Or take Talk of the Town. The entire song is built around his chiming, echo-laden riff. It's a sound that evokes a sense of longing and distance, perfectly mirroring the song's lyrical theme. It was this ability to translate emotion into sound that made him so special. He was painting pictures with his guitar. The band's first single, A cover of the Kinks' "Stop Your Sobbing" was a minor hit, but it was their third single that changed everything. "Brass in Pocket" was a song that Chrissie initially disliked, thinking it was too poppy, but Jimmy and the band saw its potential. His guitar part is a lesson in minimalist genius, a funky, strutting riff that is impossible not to move to. The song shot to #1 in the UK in January 1980. Suddenly, the Pretenders were superstars. Their self-titled debut album, released the same month, was a critical and commercial smash. It was hailed as one of the greatest debut albums of all time, a perfect fusion of punk attitude, new wave energy, and classic rock craftsmanship. They had gone from playing in tiny, sweaty pubs to headlining theaters and appearing on television screens around the world. For Jimmy Honeyman-Scott, the dream he had nurtured in his bedroom in Hereford had come true. He was in the perfect band, playing the perfect music, and the world was listening. But the speed of their ascent was dizzying, and the pressures that came with it would soon begin to exact a terrible price. Fame is a strange and dangerous drug. For a group of 4 young people from quiet backgrounds, the sudden transition to global stardom was a shock to the system. The Pretenders were thrown into the relentless cycle of album to album, a grueling schedule that leaves little room for normal life. And with fame came money, access, and temptation. Behind the scenes, the chemistry that made the band so potent on stage was becoming increasingly volatile off it. The lifestyle of a touring rock band in the early 1980s was notoriously hedonistic, and the Pretenders were no exception. Drugs, which had started as a recreational part of the scene, began to take on a more sinister role. Pete Farndon, the band's charismatic bassist, fell deep into heroin addiction. His behavior became erratic and unreliable, his playing inconsistent. He was losing himself to the drug, and his addiction created a deep rift within the band. Jimmy, for his part, was heavily into cocaine. While it didn't seem to affect his playing, he remained a consummate professional on stage. It was part of a lifestyle that was spiraling out of control. There was a fundamental tension at the heart of the band. Chrissie Hynde was the focused, disciplined leader. She was a vegetarian, increasingly health conscious, and dedicated to the craft of songwriting. The boys, as she called them, were living a more classic and more destructive rock and roll fantasy. She loved them like brothers, but she was also their boss, and their self-destruction caused her immense pain and frustration. Despite the internal turmoil, they managed to record a second album, Pretenders 2, released in 1981. It was another success, featuring hits like Message of Love and Talk of the Town. Jimmy's playing was as brilliant as ever. He was continuing to evolve, his arrangements becoming even more sophisticated. But the supporting tour was fraught with tension. The joy of the early days was being replaced by a sense of exhaustion and dread. Jimmy was becoming disillusioned. The dream he had was about the music, the camaraderie, the creation of something beautiful. The reality was becoming a grind of long bus rides, impersonal hotels, and escalating drug use. He was a sensitive and intelligent man, and the mindless hedonism was starting to wear on him. He had also found a measure of personal happiness outside the band. He had fallen in love with and married Peggy Sue Fender, a model and actress. He was buying property, thinking about a future beyond the chaotic life of a touring musician. There's a rarely mentioned story from this period that reveals his state of mind. He had started talking about forming a side project, a different kind of band with Pete Farndon and Steve Strange, the flamboyant frontman of the synth-pop band Visage. It was a sign of his creative restlessness, a desire to explore new musical avenues away from the pressures of the Pretenders. He wasn't just a sideman, he was a creator with his own ambitions. The breaking point came in the spring of 1982. The band had just finished a long tour of Asia and Australia. They were exhausted and frayed. Pete Farndon's addiction had become untenable. He was a shadow of his former self, his unreliability threatening the future of the band. Chrissie Hynde, in an agonizing decision, knew she had to act. On June 14, 1982, she called a band meeting and, with the support of Martin Chambers, fired Pete Farndon. The decision was devastating for everyone. Despite the problems, they were a family. For Jimmy, it was a particularly heavy blow. Pete was his friend, his partner in the rhythm section, the man he had brought into the band. He was reportedly deeply upset and retreated to a friend's house to process the news. He was distraught over the firing of his friend and the fracturing of the band he had helped to build. 2 days later, on June 16, 1982, James Honeyman-Scott was found dead. He had died of heart failure caused by a cocaine overdose. He was 25 years old. The news was met with stunned disbelief. It was a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. In the space of 48 hours, Chrissie Hynde had lost half of her band, the musical family she had spent years searching for. But more than that, she had lost her primary musical collaborator, her sonic architect, the man who understood her songs better than anyone. The dream was over. The perfect band was broken forever. The aftermath of Jimmy's death was a period of profound grief and confusion. For Chrissie Hynde, it was a personal and professional apocalypse. The Pretenders, as the world knew them, were gone. The music press was filled with speculation. Was this the end of the band? How could it possibly continue without its signature sound? Chrissie herself was lost in a fog of sorrow. She would later speak of the immense guilt and pain she felt. In a heartbreaking interview, she recalled, "The first thing I thought of when Jimmy died was, my God, I'm on my own. He was my musical partner. He was the one I collaborated with." She described him as her foil, the person whose musical instincts she trusted implicitly. The human cost of the tragedy was immense. A brilliant young man with a wife and a future was gone, and the darkness was not over. Less than a year later, in April 1983, Pete Farndon, the man whose firing had precipitated the final crisis, also died, drowning in his bathtub after a heroin overdose. He was 30 years old. The entire rhythm section of one of the world's biggest bands had been wiped out by drugs in the space of 10 months. It's in the face of this unimaginable loss that the story takes another turn, one of incredible resilience. Chrissie Hynde, pregnant with her first child, had to decide what to do. She could have quit, and no one would have blamed her. But music was her life, and she chose to carry on, to honor the memory of her fallen bandmates in the only way she knew how. She began writing again, and the first song she wrote after Jimmy's death became one of the Pretenders' most beloved and enduring anthems, "Back on the Chain Gang." The song is a masterpiece of pop songwriting, but beneath its upbeat, jangly surface lies a deep well of sorrow. It's a song about loss, grief, and the grim necessity of moving forward. And it is, in every note, a tribute to James Honeyman-Scott. The guitar line that opens the song, played by guest guitarist Billy Bremner, is a direct, intentional homage to Jimmy's style. It has that same shimmering, melodic quality, that same sense of space and texture. It's the sound of his ghost in the machine. The lyrics are a raw and honest expression of Chrissie's grief. "I found a picture of you. Those were the happiest days of my life." The chain gang of the title refers to the relentless, grinding cycle of the band, a cycle that had cost her so much, but one she had to return to. The song was a huge hit, a testament to the band's enduring appeal, but also a public monument to a private tragedy. The legacy of James Honeyman-Scott is twofold. First, there is the music itself. The first two Pretenders albums are perfect documents of his talent. They are a showcase for a guitarist who redefined what a lead player could be in the post-punk era. He wasn't a blues-based guitar hero like the generation before him, nor was he a minimalist punk. He was something new, a texturalist, an arranger, a melodic inventor. His influence was profound even if it was often unacknowledged. His use of chorus and echo, his focus on arpeggiated chiming chords rather than bluesy riffs, became a cornerstone of the 1980s alternative rock sound. You can hear his DNA in the playing of Johnny Marr of the Smiths, who has often cited Jimmy as a key influence. You can hear it in R.E.M, in the Cranberries, and in countless other bands who prioritized melody and texture over brute force. He created a new template for artful rock guitar, but his other legacy is more complex. It's the story of what might have been. What would Pretenders 3 have sounded like with Jimmy and Pete? Where would his musical curiosity have taken him? Would he have pursued his side project, blending rock with synth pop? He was only 25, his musical journey just beginning. We were robbed of decades of potential innovation and beautiful music. His story is also a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the human cost of the rock and roll myth. The very lifestyle that was celebrated in the press, the parties, the drugs, the rebellion, was the same force that destroyed him. His death, and Pete Farndon's, marked a kind of end of innocence for that era of new wave music. It was a brutal wake-up call that the excesses of the rock star life had real and final consequences. So why does the story of James Honeyman-Scott still matter so much? It matters because it's a story about the fragile, fleeting nature of creative genius. For a brief, brilliant moment, 4 people came together and created something perfect. They captured lightning in a bottle. His story reminds us that bands are not just brands or logos. They are collections of human beings with all their strengths, flaws, and vulnerabilities. The next time you hear a Pretender song on the radio, listen closely. Listen past the iconic voice and the powerful beat. Listen for that shimmering melodic guitar. That is the sound of James Honeyman-Scott. It's the sound of a young man from Hereford who dreamed of the perfect band and, for a short, beautiful time, found it. It's the sound of a promise fulfilled and a potential tragically unfulfilled. It's the sound of a genius who left us too soon, but whose music and whose ghost will live on forever. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.